Let's
program
start.
to do.
So
Yeah.
we haven't talked for 2 weeks, but here's the thing. Even if we had talked to each other every day, I don't think we could keep up with Trump.
No, no. You're absolutely correct, and you're absolutely right. I mean, he changes from one moment to the next. It is exhausting for
Yeah.
those like us who try to stay on top of this. It is incredibly tiring because he says one thing one day, he does something else the next day. He remains extremely powerful because he's the president of
Hmm.
the United States. So he can change, he can move markets, he
Yeah.
can send fleets of bombers flying, he can do all of these things. But the decisions change almost by the hour sometimes. Well, here is what I think. He launched this war against Iran. We discussed it many times. We discussed it before the war started. He seems to have had this idea that the moment the war started and the Ayatollah was
Hmm.
killed,
Hmm.
there would be a political crisis in Iran, and he'd end up with a government that would basically do as he told it, as has happened in Venezuela.
Hmm.
And what he's got instead is a long war with the Strait of Hormuz closed, with American allies across the Middle East being pounded, with Israel being pounded, and with energy costs all over the world exploding and going to continue to explode in ways that ultimately undercut his own position in the United States. And the government in Iran looks stronger now, actually, than it
Hmm.
did a month ago, and more hardline. And the US and Trump find themselves in a long war of attrition, which is, of course, not what they planned for, and not it's not the kind of war that the US is structured to fight. So this is my own take. I think Trump is panicking, or at least there are moments. Panic, I've had to work with panic much of the time. When people are in fear, you get these moments of when it all comes to the surface, they get very frightened. They say bizarre and incredible things, like he did a few days ago when he said that unless Iran opened the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours,
Hmm.
he would obliterate its energy system, which is impossible, by the way. It can't be done. Um, what then obviously happened is that people in the White House and the administration took him to one side, told him, no, this cannot work. What you're asking us to do, Mr. President, can't be done. Um, it's not as simple and as straightforward as you think. So then he had to walk it back on Monday, and he walked it back on Monday in the typical way that Donald Trump does, by lying. He lied by saying that there'd been some kind of negotiations over the weekend, though there clearly never were. He's done this, he does this all the time. He does this constantly. And that also is exhausting. I mean, how how does China negotiate with such a man? Anyway, he lied. And now, of course, he's still making his threats, but now he says he wants talks. He's appointing new people to conduct the talks who are better people, it must be said, Vance and Rubio than Witkoff and Kushner. But he still isn't able to come up with proposals that it seems to me the Iranians can accept or even take seriously. So I mean, he's just going from one thing to another. He's making it up from one day to the next. The military are trying to follow his orders because he's the constitutional commander in chief.
Hmm.
I think they are finding it increasingly difficult because they also have a Secretary of Defense. Let's call him Secretary of Defense. I don't like the Secretary of War nonsense. A Secretary of Defense who is also ultimately as mad as Donald Trump is as himself. I mean, the kind of language he's coming up with. But you know, the military are professionals. Their job is to carry out the president's orders, and this is for the moment what they're trying to do. I don't think they have a clear plan either, and it's very difficult to make up a plan in the middle of a war as it's going on when your commander in chief is so irrational. But that's what I think is the overall situation.
There are also some discussions, both in the US and in China, is he is manipulating the oil market and the
Yeah.
stock market, right?
Yes.
So if you look at the trading volumes and then the place the order on calls and put, um, they actually line up pretty well. You see, there's sometimes even just 5, 10 minutes before it
Mm.
started, then something happens, and then Trump made an announcement on the Truth Social, and then the stock market goes certain ways, and then you see some
Yeah.
people make huge amount of money. We don't
Yeah.
know who they are, but they are some of the irregular activities going on there. So for sure, he's doing some kind of inside trading because he knows what he's going to write on Truth
Yeah.
Social. And he knows when he writes something like that, then the market will go a certain way. And then, his people will act accordingly, right? So that seems also what's going on right now, don't you think?
There is no doubt about that at all. By the way, it's not even controversial. I mean, when even newspapers like the Financial Times
Mhm.
say that this is what's happening, which they do, they had a long article about it. I mean, there is no doubt about it whatsoever. I mean, the level of corruption within this administration, maybe not the level, but the openness with which it is happening, is again unprecedented. I mean, there's been corruption in the US government many times in its history,
Mhm.
but the way in which markets are being moved and people are profiting from them because they have inside knowledge is I've never known or heard of such a thing before. Now, this is where it's difficult to know precisely what Trump himself is doing. I mean, it's worth remembering that he's what, 80, 81. He's not here for very long. One
Mhm.
would assume that his priority at the moment is to survive as president, not to make even more money than he already has. And I think that these incredible, bizarre flip flops are more a product of private panic when we're talking about him than a private greed exactly. I'm talking specifically about the human being who is
Mhm.
Donald Trump. But the fact is that the markets are being manipulated.
Mhm.
People are being told what is going to happen. They are taking advantage of it. One gets a strong sense that members of Trump's inner circle are clearly involved,
Mhm.
including possibly some members of his family. Um, this is something which, in any rational world, ought to be the subject of immediate investigation.
Mhm.
I mean, there ought to be referrals to the FBI and to the Justice Department. There ought to be people going into the White House to find out what happened because the sums of money involved were very large, $580 million on one trade, apparently.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I mean, this is what ought to be taking place. And of course, if it's even worse than I think, and Trump really is doing this and putting people's lives at risk, and in order to enrich himself and members of his family and his entourage, well, that is to say that makes him unfit to be president is an
Mhm.
understatement.
Mhm.
I mean, there ought to be an impeachment, and
Mhm.
there ought to be a prosecution afterwards. I mean, that would be misconduct of public office on a scale unheard of. Of course, and it's symptomatic of the decay of American institutions that
Mhm.
nothing like that is happening at all. We all sit back, we tell each other how bad it is, and we do nothing. When Xi Jinping and the Chinese government are able to sack military officials because perhaps some of them have taken
Mhm.
bribes, we sit back and allow appalling things like this to happen.
Mhm.
And we say to each, oh, what a bad world this is. But, it's apparently
Mhm.
something we can't do anything about.
Well, that's part of the reason China very
Mm,
strongly against opening its financial market, which is
yeah.
one of the things the U.S. government
Yeah.
really want China to do to open
Yeah.
Chinese financial market, which is huge market for sure.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you are also being exposed to these kind of manipulation, right? That you cannot control. So what he's doing is basically proven to the world that
Yes.
whichever country you really shouldn't open your financial market.
Well,
So
absolutely. That is absolutely correct. I mean, that is so true. I mean, what one should almost say that it hardly bears saying,
mm,
except that you have to say it because if you don't say it, people won't
mm,
understand and
yeah.
won't listen. So, but you're absolutely right.
Well, some people in China think that he's intentionally trying to crash the Asian market, for example. So
Yeah.
when he talked about this threatening 48 hours, that was over the weekend. And
Yeah.
then Monday morning, when like 2 hours before the stock market in the US opens, but at that time, the Asian market already closed. So the Asian market
Mm.
opened with that news, a 48-hour thing, and they crashed throughout
Yes.
the day and everywhere in Asia. But then after it closed, so he came back, a few hours before the New York Stock Exchange opened, saying, I give them additional 5 days and stuff like that. So it's calms everybody down. So of course the U.S. market went up.
Yeah.
So lots of people saying he's intentionally just crashed the Asian market and helped the
Yeah.
Wall Street and stuff like that. I'm not so sure, but that's the end result. That is what happened. So,
That's the point. I mean, trying to work out what's in Donald Trump's mind, I
mhm,
think, is a fool's game. But the result is exactly the one you said.
mhm.
Now, the key thing to say here is that the Asian markets that are being crashed are the markets of America's friends.
Okay.
Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, where, by the way, they're now talking about stopping all civil air flights because
Uh-huh.
of the shortages of aviation fuel. I mean, it is America's own allies that are being clobbered. I
Mhm.
was looking at the economic facts in China.
Yeah.
Everything's steady. Inflation continues to be subdued.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's no fundamental stresses in the financial system. The economy continues to function as normal, precisely because of the very things that you were talking about before, that they haven't opened their financial markets to the world, so that the result is that they have stability. Um, America's friends, whose markets, of course, are open to the
Mhm.
world, are by contrast subject to this sort of chaos and manipulation.
Yeah. Now, regarding the negotiations, so we know that when he said that he already talking to Iranians, we know
Mm,
that's not true. Iran
yeah,
has said it multiple
yeah,
times. But now you just mentioned that he's sending new people
yeah,
because Iran said they're not going to continue to negotiate with Witkoff and Kushner, right?
yeah,
So he's sending new people. Regarding Witkoff and Kushner, one thing interesting is that the British National Security Advisor, I think, Jonathan Paul, he even said that Kushner and Witkoff are Israeli assets.
yeah,
That's pretty significant because
yeah,
Jonathan Paul, he's representing, I mean, he's part of the UK government. So
yes.
this is a government official openly saying those two people are Israel assets, right?
Well, absolutely. I don't think anybody really had any doubt about it, if
About
I have
that.
to be honest. But no, absolutely. I mean, Jared Kushner is obviously deeply committed, very loyal to Israel. I know less about Witkoff, but I'm sure
Mhm,
the same is true of him. And of course, they've been promoting Israeli interests all along. I mean, they don't like Iran. They're very close to the Israeli government.
mhm,
They share all the Israeli thinking about Iran. They have, yeah, I mean, the Jewish people, so
mhm,
they have this affinity for Israel. They should never have been charged with conducting a negotiation with Iran at all because they
mhm.
are far too close to one of the parties in this conflict, which is, of course, Israel. Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying.
Well, so now it seems like Vance, Rubio, they are now,
Yeah,
I mean, if Iran willing to negotiate.
yeah,
But here's the thing, this is a 15 point thing that they talked about. I looked into it. It's kind of very confusing to me. The 15 points, okay, we don't need to go through them all. But there were 2 points that I don't quite understand. So, for example, point number 5, it says enrich the uranium to remain, but under supervision and agreed limits. Okay. But then point 11 says all enriched material to be handed over to the IAEA within an agreed timeline. So is it going to be remain in Iran under supervision, or is it going to be handed over to IAEA? It contradicts each other, just 15 points. I don't
Well,
quite get
well, of
that.
course it does. I mean, it's all, again, it's all been done in a rush. Nobody's really talked this through. There's no actual plan here. I'm going to say a few things about this proposal, these 15-point proposal. Firstly, it is a tactical retreat. I
Uh,
mean,
uh,
when it started, I mean, it was quite clear that it was regime change. It was just
mhm,
overthrowing the government. I mean, all the messaging, all the rhetoric pointed in that one direction. They're not talking about that anymore. They wanted all kinds of important, massive reforms, as they call them, health reforms. In other words, drastic changes in Iran itself, basically opening up Iran to American economic exploitation. That's all dropped away. So we're back again to nuclear enrichment and the ballistic missile program. And it's all clearly the sort of thing that's written out in a hurry on the back of an envelope, as we say here in Britain. There's nobody sat and talked about this and thought it through. By the way, I've seen various versions of this 15-point plan, no less a person than Dmitry Peskov, who is Putin's spokesman. So this is the same as the various Ukraine plans. We've been given endless numbers of them, and we don't know how many there are because we haven't been shown all of them. I mean, he actually said that. He said this today. He said this is all a mess and all over the place. So, but I mean, what it basically shows is that there's no real plan. There's no real idea of how to take this forward. But if you unpack this, if you ignore these obvious contradictions, what you come to is essentially the same proposal that the Americans were making to the Iranians before the war, which is that Iran should give up all enrichment and essentially give up its ballistic missiles. Now, the Iranians have always rejected that demand, given the attack that has taken place and given that they've not been defeated. Why would they accept it now? I mean, it doesn't make any kind of sense as a negotiating strategy. It is absurd. I mean, the only point in making it maybe is to start some kind of a dialogue with the Iranians, at least send them the plan so that they can reject it, and that's a communication of a kind. But I mean, it's still a very, very strange way of doing things. And yes, I agree. Vance and Rubio are definitely an improvement over Witkoff and Kushner. But it's important to remember these are not experienced negotiators either. I mean, Vance has no background in foreign policy until he became vice president. He did a little amount of this when he was in the Senate, but not very much. Rubio's been in the Senate a very, very long time, but he's never been a diplomat himself. He's never had to sit across Arakshi or Wang Yi or Lavrov in serious negotiations. Neither man really looks prepared for this, not at this level.
Plus, they cannot really change the fact that Trump changed his mind. Depends on who he's talking to. He has maybe agreed to something, and then to have a conversation with the Lindsey Graham, he would say, no, I changed my mind. I mean, they cannot control him.
No.
So,
Exactly. His inclination always, though, is to seek confrontation. I mean, this is, I think, the constant that you see here. So, yes, he does change his mind and he does pull back. But ultimately, his instinct always is to go with the person who proposes the most aggressive, the most aggressive approach going forward. So that always gives a structural advantage to people like Lindsey Graham and Mike Waltz and all of those people. And that's why we're probably going to see another smash before long.
Yeah, he is moving troops to the Gulf region, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talking about the US want to, or Trump wants to take Cargo Island and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I mean, despite the fact he's throwing out a peace plan, so-called peace plan, nobody take it
Yeah.
seriously, but his action is he's moving troops.
Yes. Yeah.
Another thing is also, you see, that this is so confusing. Supposedly, he also suggested to the GCC countries that, okay, you pay me $5
Yeah.
trillion if you want me to continue the war. If you want to end the war, 2.5 trillion. What is he doing here?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it even more like a protection racket, isn't it? I mean, it's a shakedown. I mean, you wanted me to continue the war. Of course, I'm here for you. I'm here to provide you with all the help you need. Just give me $5 billion today. And of course, if I come back and ask for more tomorrow, well, give me that too. I mean, it's becoming so extortionate that it is almost ridiculous. Now, the Gulf states have got themselves into a terrible situation. They should have listened to those who were giving them good advice, notably China, by the way, and this China's been giving them advice, as is well known, for about 20 years. Distance yourselves from the Americans. Don't have all of these bases in the Middle East. They're not going to protect you. They're simply making you a target. Start behaving more independently. I mean, remember, UAE and BRICS and Saudi Arabia were invited to join BRICS. UAE did join BRICS, but has been very semi-detached. Saudi Arabia, in the end, well, basically it didn't. So now they find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place because the Americans aren't protecting them. They're not able to export their oil, or they have the Iranians unbelievably angry with them. Their economies and economic model is being shattered, and they're still tied to the United States, and they still can't break away. And the Americans are now coming after them for what money they still have. So, I mean, they have failed. Their diplomacy has failed disastrously.
I do notice it seems like in terms of the uh, discussions, it is more open now for people to talk about Israel.
Yeah,
Israel as a country has so much impact, so much
yeah,
control over the U.S.
yeah.
Policies.
Yes.
So, for example, Joe Kent, who was the director of the National
Mm,
Counterterrorism Center, he resigned. So, in his letter, this is what he said. He said, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran poses no imminent threat to our nation. And it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its
mm.
powerful American lobby. So he made it very clear it is because Israel we got us into this war. And
Yes.
of course, if you listen to Tucker Carlson, they openly talking about that.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
only that, in this year, the midterm election, many candidates actually distance themselves from
yes,
APAC. So they
yes.
made it very clear, a big deal, that I don't take APAC money. And the voters are asking those candidates, like, are you taking money from APAC? So I do see there's some shift in terms of the public sentiment towards
Yeah.
Israel in the US. Now, that won't change anything at this point, but that is something I see it's happening. What
I
do you
agree, and I think you're right. I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, the one thing that has now happened, it's the first time it's really happened, is that America has gone to war very publicly and very obviously and very transparently on Israel's behalf.
hmm
And
hmm
as a result, Americans are affected. They're affected because many of their sons and daughters are there fighting in the Gulf, and that makes Americans who are worried, they're members of their families, worried for them, and they're asking, why are we fighting? Why are our loved ones at risk in a war being fought on behalf of another country? So there's that.
hmm
But also, more and more Americans who are already facing a cash crisis and have been doing so for many years are now facing major economic stresses
Mhm.
because Donald Trump decided to take America to war on behalf of Israel and not the United States.
It is remarkable how little support this war has.
Yeah.
Remember when Bush invaded Iraq? I mean, they were like over 60% of support, and
Yeah.
he made it his case, in front of the Congress, in the United Nations, But this war from the beginning, it was like 25% of people approve. This is
Yeah.
like Fox. Fox viewers are much more, pro-Trump than the
Yeah.
rest. So there was only 25% of the Fox viewers that supported this war.
Yeah.
And the Congress, there were some people questioning. Now, I was hoping, I always hope that Congress could do more, but they don't. But there isn't, it seems like now Trump is asking for more money. The Congress is at least delaying it, not, give him like just a blank check. So all these things should tell us, and that the European allies are not enthusiastic. Of course, it's the GCC countries. Just the overall very little support for this war, which I find pretty unique compared to the previous ones, right? That it seems like just the US and Israel that is fighting this war. Whereas previously, the US always can get a whole bunch of other countries, whether they're significant or not, but at least on the surface, you can see a lot more countries join, right?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, this war has no support in the global community. In fact, people are shocked and appalled by it. I mean, you only have to go to the European media to see the extent to which even allies of the United States, staunch allies of the United States, are shocked by this. And domestically, at a time launching a war of this kind, a war of choice on behalf of another country, at a time when the mood of increasing numbers of people in the United States is that we should stay at home and look after and focus on our own problems. I mean, that was a grotesque mistake. It says a huge amount about the extraordinary political world in which Donald Trump and his entourage live, that they didn't see that. And by the way, your other points about the fact that they didn't go to Congress, they didn't go to the UN Security Council. You remember George W. Bush at least went through the motions of doing those things. Trump didn't even bother. And I don't know that many people in the US actually think about this very much, but I suspect it deepens at some level the overall sense of unease that we are at the mercy of, as a friend of mine called it, an American friend of mine called it, the Mad King. And there doesn't seem to be any restraint on him, any constitutional or legal bar that can restrain him.
But I'm not sure he cares the fact that there is not much support. If you listen to Lindsey Graham over the weekend, he had this interview with the Fox. He was very clear. He wanted to convince. He said, "I will tell the president to take a cargo island," which means the ground troops, right? That's what it is. And even the person that interviewed him saying, "Well, the military is not certain about that because it's not clear that there's enough supply, it's a tricky situation, in other words, right?" And the Iranians have put a lot of defense mechanism around this island as well because it's geographically important. Nonetheless, he doesn't seem to care about that at all. He just thinks that the president should take that. And he says, like once we have that, we have the full control of the Strait of Hormuz, like a problem solved. That kind of talk, isn't that how you get into the Vietnam War? Like we get things done, that's it.
Yes, and I mean again, it's this belief which amongst these people has become almost a religious belief that American power is infinite and that all you need to do is apply it and it will achieve the result you want. So, you attack Iran, you expect that killing the Ayatollah will bring about change of government there. That doesn't work. But you can't retreat. You can't pull back from that, because if you did, if you admitted that there was a limit to your power, that would violate this deep-seated religious belief in your own limitless power that you have. So that propels you forward. And you say, well, killing the Ayatollah didn't do it, so we must take Kharg Island. And there's no actual real explanation of why that would work, as opposed to not working. And there's no real attempt to address any of the problems of capturing, and perhaps even more important, retaining control over Kharg Island.
Yeah.
I mean, but you just have to go pushing on. And I agree with Lindsey Graham, that is exactly the mindset he has. And he does have enormous influence over Trump. And I don't think Trump himself is ever really able to push back against this kind of argument. And, we're talking about Lindsey Graham. I think another very powerful figure who's also apparently been giving Trump advice to pursue this war and who doesn't get enough attention is Rupert Murdoch, who is who's the owner of Fox. But apparently he's been seeing Trump and has been telling him, you must press on with this war. It's essential that you press on this war. Of course, in Rupert Murdoch's case, he's got all the fervor of a recent migrant. I mean, he's Australian, but he took American citizenship, and he's always wanted to believe in limitless American power. And so, Trump is never able to push back against this because, as you rightly said, he mostly shares these ideas himself. For people like this, it is never a question of resources or planning. It's always a question of will. All you need is to show will, and the rest will follow.
And then Lindsey Graham is very good at playing to Trump's ego, I think. He even said something like, okay, once we take the cargo island, we are in full control, okay? Problem solved. Yeah. We will control the Strait of Hormuz. Not only that, there will be peace, forever peace between the Arab and Israelis, which he said have been not resolved for 2,000 years. So he must have been told Trump, okay, you do this, you can solve this problem for 2,000 years, that nobody could do it. I mean, Trump actually buys into that, don't you think?
Yes, I know. Absolutely, he does. And I mean, I'm not going to even try to repair his historical ignorance on this, which is almost comically wrong. But anyway, but no, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what Graham is about. He's very clever at flattering Trump and winning Trump over, and buttering up Trump's ego, which is very fragile, and getting on the right side of Trump in that way. This president is very susceptible to flattery. Now, you see, this is where, again, a strong leader, a experienced leader, somebody who's much more understanding of politics, and like a leader like Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, they are not susceptible to flattery in that way.
Yeah, they're more fact-based, right? They want to know.
More fact-based.
Yeah, what's going on, not just somebody saying, oh, you can solve this problem that hasn't been solved by anybody for 2,000 years. I mean, first of all, Israel didn't exist until 1948, right? So
exactly.
Anyway.
Well, if you accept it on its own as an absurd truth, I mean, if it can't be solved in 2,000 years, is it going to be solved by Donald Trump? I mean, that's perhaps a more valid question for someone like Trump to ask. I mean, maybe Napoleon or Hercules can solve it, but I mean, can Donald Trump? I mean, if Caesar Augustus and Julius Caesar and Solomon and all of these people who were there weren't able to solve it, what chance is that Trump can?
the one thing that is obvious to everybody now is that Iran actually gets some of the things that Iran, after the war, is getting now that they didn't get during all these years of negotiation. So, for
Yeah,
example, partially lifting the sanctions of
yeah,
oil. So,
yeah,
Iran now is selling more oils, way more oils than before the war at a higher
yeah.
price, much
Yes,
higher price.
yes,
And it
yes,
also charges fees for ships passing through
yeah,
the Strait of Hormuz.
yes.
So, from Iranian's perspective, this war, of course, it has a lot of casualties and all that sort of thing. But
Mm.
they also gained something that they couldn't get by negotiations, right?
Correct, absolutely. Then they've demonstrated their power, and they've forced themselves into the global economy from which the United States was trying to exclude them. I
Mm,
mean, they are the clear winners here. And by the way, I've seen reports that ships that do seek to pass the Strait of Hormuz, if the Iranians are prepared to let them pass at all and charge them a fee, they want to be paid in yuan.
yeah, Chinese yuan, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but here's my question though. But now, once these kind of thing, once it's started happening,
Mm,
there is a tendency of even after the war ended. I mean, if I were Iran, why do I stop? Right? Why I can continue to charge fees. It's which is,
yeah,
people will pay, okay, because it's
yeah,
still cheaper to go through the Strait of
yeah,
Hormuz than going
yeah.
all the way, to through Africa and
Correct.
that. It's still cheaper.
Yes.
So it could be a long-term thing then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for Iran, I don't. There is no logic in Iran. There's no compelling reason why Iran would want to relax its hold over the Strait of Hormuz.
Hmm.
It has now been demonstrated to Iran that it has a chokehold over the global economy. And from their point of view, it makes perfect sense to exploit that as long as they can in order to benefit themselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, over time, this is going to make them huge amounts of money.
Hmm.
So why should they give that up? Now, eventually, the world will reorganize itself. There'll be pipelines built
Hmm.
across the Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea. More countries will move towards green electricity to batteries and solar power and nuclear reactors, but all of this will take time.
Yeah.
Iran has about 10 years where it can make use of this in exactly the way that you said. And why wouldn't they?
Hmm. And now they're now, of course, joking. So there's some
Yeah,
social media people from Taiwan. They were saying, well, maybe we can charge people from Taiwan Strait as well because
yeah,
that's also a
yeah,
chokehold, right? And then
yeah,
of course the Strait of Malacca,
yeah,
the, the English Canal.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
everybody can
Yeah.
charge now.
Well, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I mean, the Iranians actually do make one very, very valid point. They say, what value is there in freedom of navigation, which is what the Americans are always talking
Hmm.
about,
Hmm.
when there is no freedom of trade?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is true. I mean,
That's true.
Iran has not been allowed to trade, not been tried to trade normally.
Hmm.
So why should they accept freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz when the benefit that's supposed to come from that, which is freedom of trade, is denied to them?
Yeah. Plus, I didn't know that Turkey apparently already charging fees for Turkey straits, right? So
Yeah,
Iran is not even the first one who has done this.
no,
So,
exactly, exactly. Mm.
um, neighboring countries, it seems like the things are spreading, right? So the Houthis already said they
Mm.
might block Bab and Mandeb Strait. They
Yeah,
haven't done that, but that's a
yeah,
possibility. Okay.
yes,
Now, Israel has also been bombing Lebanon, which doesn't got a lot of attention. In
no,
particular, they are bombing, destroy a lot of our bridges on
yeah,
the Litani
yeah,
River.
yes,
And there, I think it's a finance minister even said that we should move the border to the Litani River.
yes,
That
yeah,
that is going on there too. Plus,
yes,
also Iraq also have some heavy fighting there too. That U.S. and
yes,
NATO troops are leaving or something. So
yeah.
several things going on. So there is definitely a regional war there, right?
It's expanding. It's getting worse all the time. The Gulf states obviously have been I mean, they're in crisis. In Iraq, there is a very powerful reaction against the United States. There are growing demands that the Americans leave. There have been attacks on American bases. The Americans have conducted attacks on Iraqi military units. Today, the Iraqi government called in US diplomats to the Iraqi foreign ministry to lodge a complaint with them, which is extraordinary, given, the history in Iraq. All the world, all the talk is that the United States is going to be forced finally to withdraw from Iraq, where it planted itself after the invasion in 2003. In Lebanon, the Israelis again advanced into Lebanon. Smotrich, who is the finance minister that you spoke about, is an extreme hardliner. I mean, he is at the very most extreme level in Israeli politics. Obviously, he wants to control all of southern Lebanon, annex all of Lebanon south of the Litani River, because that's part of his Greater Israel project. And he is very much in control in Israel. I mean, this is somebody that Netanyahu listens to. But the fighting with Hezbollah has proved to be much more difficult, again, than the Israelis apparently expected. And the thing that I think terrifies everybody is if the Houthis do become involved. Now, the Houthis and the Saudis fought a long war with each other. There was a peace agreement, which was generally held, whereby each agreed that they would not attack the other. And the Saudis apparently are trying to get the Houthis to stick to that. But for the Saudis, the Houthis entering the war and closing the Red Sea is the ultimate nightmare, because then that chokes off Saudi Arabia's oil exports. That will create a crisis within Saudi Arabia. And of course, one is completely unsure how stable in the end the government of Saudi Arabia really is. So what the Houthis do is going to be very important. And of course, with every day that the war drags on, with every week that the war drags on, the prospect of the Houthis joining it grows. If Saudi Arabia joins the war against Iran, which is what the Americans are trying to get Saudi Arabia to do, I think the likelihood that the Houthis will join and will attack Saudi Arabia and will close the Red Sea, that prospect grows exponentially.
I hope Saudi can get the message that don't do these kind of things.
Not quite.
Okay. So what will happen? What should Trump do at this point? He got himself into this war without much preparation, clearly, and the reaction is way more stronger than he ever expected. What is the best option for him right now, then?
Yes, well, I'll tell you what he's going to do. He's going to try to conduct a ground operation. He's going to do what Lindsey Graham tells him. He's going to send the 82nd Airborne Division into what could be a trap in Kharg Island. He's going to escalate. I mean, everything that we've seen over the last 4 weeks points in that direction. But this is what he should do. He should call Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping friends of Iran, two countries that have been saying to Iran, look, show restraint, show moderation, but we accept that you are in the right. You sent me the readout from the Chinese Foreign Ministry of the conversation between Wang Yi and Arakshi. And it was very interesting. If you read that readout, that Arakshi assured Wang Yi, that the Strait of Hormuz is not closed, that shipping can pass through it. So you see that Iran does listen to what China is saying. And you also see from what the readout says Wang Yi said to Arakshi that China does want to see an end to the war. And with the Russians, let me assure you, it is exactly the same. Yes, the Russians are making a huge amount of money now because the oil price is higher. And yes, it does put them in a stronger position in Ukraine. But the Russians are appalled by this situation. They do not want to see a massive crisis on their close to their own borders. They regard Iran as a friendly country. They want to preserve it and the political system there. And they also worry, and they're right to worry, that Donald Trump is completely losing control of things and that there might be an escalation to unbelievable levels. And there was a speech, rather not a speech, but there was well, it was a speech, actually, it's an address that Lavrov gave to an institution in Russia called the Gorchakov Fund, which deals with foreign policy issues. It's a think tank in which he said all of these things. He said, we want to see peace. So what Trump should do is he should phone Xi Jinping. Notice that he didn't go to China. I said it. I said if it doesn't work, he's going to call off this visit that he himself insisted upon. He's not going to go to China, but he should call Xi Jinping. He should call Vladimir Putin. He should perhaps send Vance and Rubio to Beijing and Moscow. He should look for help from those two countries to try to get peace talks, real serious peace talks, set up with Iran. And of course, those peace talks should address some of the issues, the concerns about Iran's nuclear program, though I think that ought to be a very easy thing to solve because Iran has repeatedly said it does not want nuclear weapons. And we can then start to address all of the various other issues, and the Iranians can be offered in return a lifting of sanctions, and also perhaps more important for the Iranians, some kind of security guarantees from China and Russia so that they can be confident that there won't be this sort of attack on them again. That is a proper step-by-step way towards resolving this crisis. The Americans won't do it, and there'll be all sorts of people who will oppose it. And of course, for people like Lindsey Graham and Rubio and others, the idea of asking China for help is appalling to them. And the idea of negotiating arrangements which would make China one of the guarantors of stability in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf specifically, is perhaps their greatest nightmare. So unfortunately, this wonderful, clear way forward that I've laid out isn't going to happen. Remember what I always said, at the back of everything, it's always China.
For one thing, Marco Rubio is now sanctioned by both Russia and China. He can't even travel those two countries.
I know.
Only Vance could do it. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, since it's not going to happen, it seems like ground troops is going to be, and I agree with you. Yes, on the surface, Russia did benefit so far from this war, but I also think Russia, Putin, Lavrov, they probably are concerned of the escalation because if it comes to a point, either Israel or US using, for example, nuclear bomb, I don't think anybody want to see that. I don't think Russia have even the remotest interest for anything like that, right? So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. And which is not unlikely. Maybe Trump even said that not that long ago. He said we have, nuclear. He walked back a little bit afterwards, but he said that in one of these, many time talk. He talked all the time, of course. And one time he did say, "Oh, we have, nuclear. If we can't we do have, real arsenals and something like that." So it's scary, but I'm sure everybody's thinking about that. Certainly Trump, Netanyahu, they certainly are thinking about that.
Of course, they are. I would add something else about the Russians, and they talk about this quite openly amongst themselves. I mean, they say if oil prices were to reach $200 a barrel, say, yeah, we make a lot of money in the meantime, but impossible for them to stay so high for very long.
Mhm.
There would be a global recession, and it is quite likely that in conditions of global recession and economic crisis, oil prices will collapse.
Mhm.
They could collapse as soon as the autumn. So
Mhm.
they might, throughout the summer, rise and rise and rise $100, $110, $150, $200, $250. And then we will see a vertical
Mhm.
crash to $20 a barrel or something of that kind. So, from a Russian point of view, yes, there are some short term gains, but they're not worth it. I
Mhm.
mean, $70 a barrel, which is what oil was trading at before the war, was not a crisis for Russia.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think this is the thing people just don't get. They can cope with that. They
Mhm.
have a far more diversified economy than people understand. $200 a barrel is a problem for them too, and one that they could see is going to be an even bigger problem later.
Mhm. Do you think Trump would take Cuba? There's a lot of
Yeah.
things going on there too.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know what it looks to me like? It's like an old man who is ticking off um, the old lost battles of the Cold War.
Mhm.
So he's got this massive thing about Iran because way back in 1979 they had a revolution and they took American diplomats as hostages. He's got this. He's got this fixation with
Mhm.
Cuba, a small country of 10 million people,
Yeah.
no conceivable threat to the United States. So, yes, I think he could try and take Cuba. He doesn't seem keen on invading Cuba.
Mhm.
And what I've heard about it is that the military there, though small, is well trained and probably could put up a fairly good account of itself for itself. But what he's trying to do, and it's incredibly cruel, is he's trying to strangle it economically.
Mhm. Yeah, one thing that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, so if you read
Mm.
through the letter, the exchange from Kennedy and
Yeah,
Kushner, there was promises made by Kennedy that will not, as the condition for the Soviet to
yeah,
remove all those missiles was to basically never invade Cuba.
yeah.
That's
No.
my understanding, and that's well known, right? Isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely well known. I mean, it's an absolutely. I mean, what Trump is doing completely violates the
Mhm.
agreement that was reached in 1962. Um, Try explain that to Trump and Rubio and all the others. I mean, it's just the same as with Taiwan. I mean, they
Yeah,
made all
yeah.
those agreements in the 70s
Mhm.
to, and as you've yourself pointed out to me many times, they've not honored them. They're not going to honor them with
Mhm.
Cuba either. One has to feel sorry for this island, by the way,
Yeah.
which has made a real effort to develop itself. It's got a good education system. It's
Mhm.
got a very good health system. It's achieved actually an awful lot, despite all of the tremendous economic pressures. It's apparently the safest country by far to go to in the
Mhm.
Americas. It's the
Yeah.
only place. Now, I've spoken to British friends who've been there. It's the only place where a woman can go out at night in
Mhm.
any Latin American country and not and feel completely safe. And yet,
Mhm.
nonetheless, despite all of that, despite doing so many good things, it's now coming under all of this enormous pressure from Trump and the administration again. There's a famous quote from a Latin American leader, Porfirio Diaz, who was president once of Mexico. He said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so near to the USA."
Yeah, that's the problem for
Yeah,
these countries
mm,
surrounding the US. Yeah.
yeah,
So let's look at the China US. So
yeah,
he postponed his visit to Beijing,
mm,
and he said
mm,
1 month. Okay. But again, China never agreed to this
Mm.
March 31st date. He just come up with ideas. Okay, I'm
Yes,
going there,
yes,
March 31st. Oh, no,
yeah.
not. I'm too busy. So another month.
Mm.
Um, so I guess you mentioned this, that part of the reason he said is because there's a war going on. He's too busy
Mm.
about that. But you think that he had nothing to show for because this war is not
Exactly.
going well, right?
Yes,
So that's
yes.
the reason. But do you think he still plan to go like after a month or something?
I don't think so. I mean, it depends how the war goes. I mean, if it ends
Uh-huh.
in some kind of unexpected victory, then he might decide to go. But the whole point about going when he did was that he expected that he would go the winner. He'd have overthrown
Mhm.
Iran. He'd have thrown BRICS into chaos. He'd have achieved all of these great objectives, and he won't want to face Xi Jinping as a loser.
Uh-huh.
I
Okay.
mean, of course, if he was a real president of the United States, a serious man, a JFK, for example,
Mhm.
he would know it's even more important to meet with Xi
Mhm.
Jinping at this time.
Yeah, to
But
talk about the situation. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
He would also know that because Xi Jinping is a leader
Hmm.
who thinks always about China's best interests, Xi Jinping is not going to go out of his way to humiliate him. He will receive Trump properly, with
Hmm.
all the courtesy, with all the respect that the leader of the United States should expect. That is what Xi Jinping will do.
Hmm.
But of course, in Trump's mind, where everything revolves around face and ego and all of those things, where the interests of the United States are secondary to his own vanity and sense of self esteem, he will not want to face the man who he has labeled America's greatest adversary, as by the way, Joe Biden also did. He won't want to face him a loser. And that's why he won't go.
I think both Biden and Trump, they feel very insecure in front of Xi
Yeah.
Jinping
Yes.
and Putin. I think
Yes.
they
Yes.
are.
Everybody feels insecure
Hmm.
towards Xi Jinping except Putin.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Hmm.
Putin and Xi Jinping get on very well,
Yeah.
and they like each other. You can tell that they do like each other. There's a great
Yeah.
deal of respect. It's not because Xi Jinping is the leader of China
Hmm.
that they feel this way about Xi Jinping. It's because he despite being if you see him, he's a very polite man. I mean, I follow leaders very closely. You can
Hmm.
always tell when somebody's very polite. He is a very polite man, but they all feel when they meet him that he's better than them. And that is always something that is very scary. I'm not saying this to you because you're Chinese and I
Hmm.
want to flatter people in China, but it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
you come up against a leader who has all the facts at his fingertips,
Hmm.
has complete understanding of all of the issues, who can talk about all of the things that are happening in the world and talk about them intelligently and sensibly and in detail, who's able to conduct serious negotiations. There are very, very few leaders in the world like that at the present time. There are a few, but Xi Jinping is the outstanding one.
Hmm.
And this is what makes Westerners in particular, and Americans especially, extremely nervous in his
Hmm.
presence.
Yeah. The trade talks, there was a
Yeah.
negotiation, I
Mm.
mean, another round of
Mm.
talk in Paris, which I don't see any significant breakthrough. What do you think?
No, there's been no breakthrough, nor can there be. For that, I get to ask you now a question of my own.
Mhm.
Yesterday, I had a meeting with a executive of a big mining company in Britain,
Okay.
and his company is interested in mining gold and tungsten. Tungsten is this very important metal. He said to me that 90% of global supply of tungsten comes from China.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
I mean it is, and he also explained. I mean, the Russians also produce a certain
Hmm.
amount. Kazakhstan is also a
Mm-hmm.
significant producer. Tajikistan also is.
Yeah.
But China is the dominant player. And he said to me a few things that tungsten is absolutely essential. And he said one of the reasons why America has so completely failed in hypersonic missile technology is because you need tungsten in large quantities because that's the material you need to make effective hypersonic missiles. Anyway, he said to me yesterday, and I've heard nothing about this, that over the last few weeks, the supply of tungsten is starting to dwindle in global markets and that prices therefore are rising. And he said that he believed that China, because they know that it is a dual use metal, in other words, the US is using it in the war, has to use it in the war to fight against Iran. He said to me that the word in the market is that the Chinese are starting to slow supply. Have you heard anything about that? Have you seen anything about this in the media? Because I haven't here, by the way, not in Britain, but just asking that question.
Well, I haven't read particularly about tungsten, but I do know that China is controlling, I mean, tightening like rare earth in general, the U.S. has been asking, to now China hasn't said a downright ban,
No.
but it's very tight controlled for sure, and they're
Yeah.
busting, people who try to smuggle all those
Yeah.
things left and right, which
Yes.
you see how desperate, the people
Yes.
who really needs them are. The
Yes.
other thing is that China also made it clear to stop exporting all the oil-related products. So
Yes.
China processing a lot of oil too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so China doing a lot of the export,
Yeah.
petrochemical products as well. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if this is happening
Yes.
because
Yes.
right now it's so much uncertainty in the world. What's going to happen? Nobody knows what's going to happen, how long this war
Mm.
is going to happen. If it's continued, the Strait of Hormuz continue to close for another month, that would be a pure nightmare for everybody. Okay.
Yes.
China being so big, it has huge industry, so big population, China has to be careful with everything. I think the
Yes.
Chinese government is very careful with everything
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
And so for these things that are rare earths related or these things that are generally speaking very sensitive material for anything, I think I wouldn't be surprised that they put in extra
Yeah.
control on these things.
Yes. Yes.
So that's I
Well,
think it's what's going on. Yeah.
yeah, interesting. That, yeah, I mean, that seems to corroborate a bit of what he says.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, I do find that interesting and important, and of course, that also increases the pressure on Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, it has bearing on the trade talks as well, because the trade talks, as you absolutely rightly say, are stuck. I mean, there's no movement on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But from Trump's point of view, there are all sorts of clocks that are now ticking. Clocks in terms of missile depletions, which we've talked about many times. Clocks about energy price costs and the energy price shock, which is coming. I read somewhere that the Pentagon has only a 2-month reserve of rare earths.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have more. And of course, if it's having problems building up that stockpile, that's a problem too. It can apparently reach out to the civilian industry because they also keep reserves of rare earths. And it could also reach out to allies. But then that creates a whole new set of problems because if you're taking rare earths from civilian industry, that's going to affect their production. And we've also now got other materials like tungsten. Tungsten is tungsten is not obviously a rare earth, but
Mm-hmm.
other things like that. The
Mm-hmm.
squeeze, if the squeeze is on, Trump will know about this, even if we don't. I mean, it is going to be deepening the sense of crisis in the White House. And of course, given the kind of man we're talking about and the kind of advice he's getting, that make him even more reckless.
Yeah, they affect things that we don't normally think about.
Yeah.
Like fertilizer now is a problem.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
India is asking fertilizer from China because China
Yes.
is controlling the export on that.
Yes, indeed.
Um,
Yes.
so I mean,
India,
if it
India, India having to ask China for fertilizer, Well, that's a lesson that perhaps people in India need to think about very carefully.
There's, I
I
mean,
mean,
there's,
given how important
Mhm.
agriculture is in
Yeah,
India, just say,
yeah. And there are countries already affected. I mean, not every
yeah,
country has a long reserve, for
no,
anything. In
no,
Cambodia, they already, I think,
no.
two-thirds of their gas station already closed now. So,
Yes, that's right. That's right.
and there are lines in Vietnam and stuff like that. So
Yes,
I don't know how it's going to progress. The war continues,
no,
right? So,
no,
um, here another thing is that regarding China US, there's something very strange happening, in my view. On the
mm,
one hand, I think because China is so important in so many aspects for, in particular now Trump is in a war, it's actually, I think, more important to have a good relationship with China. But
yeah,
the US government, for example, universities, they closed some of departments to Chinese students, for
yeah,
example. They think China is
mm.
stealing technology from them. Okay. So it's very strict. Like my husband is working for a public university. There's a lot of new rules.
China's stealing technology.
Well,
They still think that. After all this happened, they still think that.
well, Larry Ellison, he said that. He said,
Yeah.
they're always they're stealing everything from us. There are plenty of
You
people
know,
who
you know,
still think
you know,
that.
you know. If China solved the problem of warp speed, they would say they stole it from the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, this is. I mean, anyway, you've left me speechless. So I'll continue, Sophia, with your point. Yeah,
So the government have a lot of rules on this and that, and so there is
yeah,
very little communications at the government
yeah,
level. At
yeah,
the same time, there's also a
mm,
delegation. It's called the U.S.-China Business Council.
mm,
So there is an organization, and they
mm,
have like a 14, 15 company executives now, U.S.
mm,
companies, Boeing, Tesla,
mm, mm,
FedEx, Apple. So these have company executives now, they are now visiting in China.
yeah,
So you see there's a disconnection, right, from the government, that there's no
yeah,
connection, we just hate each other. But then at the same time, companies and there's, regular people, there are lots of people, Americans go to China to visit, and
yeah,
you see a lot of on social media, those
yeah,
videos, a self-media person to
yeah,
show you, okay, I just
yeah.
visited here and there. There's a lot of them now.
Yeah.
So you see the disconnection there. Isn't
There
that
is there
contradictory?
is
Very
an
interesting.
it's getting worse, and it's going to get, and it's going to continue to get worse. It's getting worse all the time. This is, I said this. There are two countries called China. There's the real place where people live, which people visit, which is developing its economy and it's moving forward. And then there is the imaginary country that exists inside the paranoid American mind. And the bad luck of the first country is that it has the same name as the second. I mean, it's just. I mean, no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, to come back to your point, there is total disconnection.
Mhm.
And it's all. By the way, I should just say, I mean, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but I am inundated with all sorts of angry people in the US who say, "You don't understand anything about the Iran war. Don't you understand that this is all about China?" Seriously, the idea being, we're going to take over Iran and
Mhm.
stop the oil flow from Iran to China, and that's going to put us back in a position of leadership. And why don't you get it? And
Mhm.
this is what this is all about. And it's all about blockading and in
Mhm.
China. I mean, first of all, why do you want to blockade China anyway? I mean,
Yeah.
what material benefit you get from that? I mean, already that is incredibly. I mean, that's an evil idea. Just to say, it is an evil idea to set out to blockade a country simply because it's been economically more successful than your own. That is ludicrous. But at an actual practical material level, the plan, if it exists, and I suspect it does, is mad. It's
Yeah.
absolutely mad. China is 84%. I got the figures,
Mhm.
84% self-sufficient in energy. It is probably in a crisis able to increase that more because, in a crisis, you can mobilize and do all sorts of things. And which country in the world is better positioned to do that than China? It has 6 months of reserves. So if China imported no oil at all, it has enough oil in its reserves to get it through 6 months at full production, just to say. And of course, it's got its ally and friend, Russia, which will continue to supply China with oil no matter what happens, because the Russians see this as a matter of existential importance to themselves. So this plan, which I mean, I do think at some level there are some people within the US who are thinking it, is a crazy one. It's wrong and evil and crazy all at the same time. But people just don't talk rationally about this. They don't talk about the actual country. They mostly don't like to go to China, to Shanghai, because once it's Beijing or wherever, because they worry that if they did, it would shatter their illusions about it. And so we get all this nonsense instead.
Well, Lindsey Graham actually said that. He said that Venezuela together with Iran will be 31% of the world oil. And if we get all that, well, like China will be in big trouble. He said something like that, I think.
I know, they do, absolutely. I mean, the point is China doesn't need 30% of the world's oil. It is 84% self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I mean, it has enough oil in its reserves to get through at full levels for 6 months. And it doesn't need to import that much. That's what people like Lindsey Graham don't want to believe. America may be an oil economy. China is not. Again, I've been hearing that there's been no declines in energy output in China. And I've been hearing that the cost of energy in China is stable. It may be surging everywhere else in the world, but in China, it is not.
I think they adjust the price slightly up a little bit, but before they did that, they let everybody know. So if you see lines outside, Chinese gas station, it's because they are expecting the government actually told them, it's going to increase a little bit. So
exactly.
So it's a different way.
No.
One of the winners of this whole thing, now, of course, Russia is a winner. Actually, the other one is Hong Kong, apparently. There's huge inflood of money from the Middle East. And they didn't go to Singapore. They didn't go to Geneva. They actually went to Hong Kong. I have a number here. Like before the war, on average, so capital inflow from the Middle East on average to Hong Kong is somewhere between 2.5 to 4 billion per month. Okay. But once the war started, now they are receiving close to 40 billion per week. Just to give you an idea.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So
that is incredible.
Yeah. So the reason I think, well, Geneva, Switzerland they did themselves a disservice when they frozen the Russian asset. And Singapore, I think a lot of people no longer trust that Singapore will be that safe. Because Singapore is more or less like Dubai, kind of places that under the umbrella of the US, but look at what happened in Dubai, right? So that's why people look around and maybe Hong Kong, people do trust that Hong Kong will be protected by China. And so I think that's the reason. What do you think?
I mean, I think this is one of the most important pieces of news I've heard over the last 3 weeks. I mean, this is what we're talking about is an economic revolution. I mean, anybody who is familiar with the way in which the world economy has developed over the last 50 years, since the oil price shock of 1973, knows how absolutely critical the flow of finance from the Gulf has been to the Western financial system. What you've now, I just want to see if I've got those numbers right. $2 to $4 billion a year was what it was per month.
Before the war.
Before the war. And now it's $40 billion a week.
Yeah.
So Gulf money is no longer going to the West. is going to Hong Kong
Yeah.
instead. Hong Kong obviously is distinct from China in some respects, but it is China.
Yeah.
As I say, that is a global revolution. That completely changes the rules of the game. I mean, if it continues for much longer, it is every bit as important as everything else that we've been talking about: the rare earths, the tungsten, the missiles, the oil prices, everything else. I don't think that there's been anywhere near enough coverage of this in the West.
They don't want you to know.
$40 billion a week.
Yeah, immediately after the war. I'm sure it's not going to be sustained like that. There's an initial panicking, but it's still very significant. And
Well,
there's still,
well, it's very symptomatic that they're not going to America. It explains why the dollar has strengthened a little. It's strengthened nowhere near as much as one might expect in a time of crisis, given that the dollar historically has always had safe haven status. The money is going to China because ultimately it is China instead.
Wow. Yeah, there's also a lot of an increase of the inquiries about, there's a lot of extremely wealthy families. So they have, special client divisions, and those divisions have been extremely busy, etc. So all the signs shows that there is a huge influx of funding from Middle East. Yeah.
Gosh.
What do you think the net effect, other than the fact that Russia now, they get a lot more money for their oil? What are the other effects it's on for the Ukraine and the Russian conflict there?
Well, I mean, for Ukraine, this has been an absolute catastrophe. I mean, they relied on the United States for their weapons. They've relied on the Europeans for their funding. They're going to find that they're not getting either anymore because all American weapons are being sent to fight in the Middle East. And they're burning through their weapons incredibly fast. And if the white fighting ends, assuming everything is still functional, they would presumably want to build up their own reserves first. So the flow of weapons of the US is ending. And the flow of money from Europe is going to end too, because we are in a series of elections. We are in a period of economic crisis and stress. And every single European government is in a major budgetary crisis, even before the surge in energy costs, which is coming. So the money's going to stop. The weapons are going to stop. The Russians are going to have more money and they produce more weapons and they have more men on the battlefronts. So we see that the negotiations have stopped. The Americans have lost all interest in Ukraine, unsurprisingly. So the Ukrainians are closer than they have ever been since 2014 to being left on their own.
And the European Commission, they just removed a proposal to permanently ban Russian oil imports from their April agenda. I think April 15th or something. First of all, how can you decide on anything on a permanent basis?
You told me. I was a crazy idea, which was accepted and was going to be enacted into law. I mean, it tells you the level of economic absurdity and illiteracy that there is, and the level of fantasy and delusion that we have. I mean, it's like saying in 1940 that because you're at war with Germany, you're never going to trade in Germany ever, no matter what happens in the war. I mean, it's just, it's crazy. I mean, it is that level of absurd. But anyway, they've obviously had to drop that because they all know deep down that one way or the other, in some way or other, they're going to have to import oil from Russia because there won't be any other oil available. And by the way, what they may find is that the Russians aren't that keen to supply them with that much oil. I've said this 101 times, and it's a lesson that always requires repeating. Every economic and business relationship has in the end to be built on trust. Even if another party offers you a higher price, if you don't trust them, logic tells you that you should go instead with the party that you do. Russia trusts China. Absolutely. It doesn't trust Europe at all.
Yeah, trust is right now a big problem for this whole conflict. I mean, why would Iran trust US on anything? Right. Last time they were in the middle of a negotiation when US assassinated their leaders. So, I mean, with that, any negotiation, I find if I were the Iranians, why? I mean, how can they negotiate with the United States, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, if you trust, it's not just business relationships. Trust is the basis of all relationships, business, political, diplomatic, whatever. If there is no trust, if you cannot trust someone, then you can't work with them in any way. I mean, if you are dealing with a psychopathic government, which is what the United States has become effectively, then you can't work with it.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, that's the world we're living in right now. There's just, I can never imagine the day that we're living in a world that everybody is like, United States is, we cannot trust it. That's the one country everybody should trust, right? But no, nobody's trusting the United States right now.
No. Yes. Okay. And they don't seem to care. I mean, that's the extraordinary thing.
No.
So many Americans seem to be so, I mean, they seem to be very angry. They seem to think that, the world owes them a living for some reason, that, it has a right to be number one. And if it's not number one, it has every right to smash the furniture and make life impossible for everyone else. It's a spoiled child with nuclear weapons. It's incredibly dangerous.
So let's see what's going to happen next week. Indeed. I mean, a week, a lot of things can happen. We know
an awful lot can happen. I'll tell you the most extraordinary thing when you tell me that they're still saying in America that China is stealing the technology from them.
Plenty of people in the US think that. They believe that. So as ridiculous as it is, but they are. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, then, Sophia, have a great week.
Let's talk next week. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.